let's take a look at what is a risk scorecard. So within the risk scorecard, what we want to do is understand the relationship between the strategic objectives and risk in the organization. So if we listed the strategic objectives, and next to that we listed the priorities, how important are those strategic objectives for the current planning period, whether that's the next quarter, next year, next 5 years. And we typically express this as a weighting. These add up to 100%. This is 100% of your strategy. Then what we do is we take a look at the risk register that currently exists, and within that, each of the risk elements. Then for each risk element, we're going to look at two things. First, what is the impact of that risk element against that strategic objective? So we're being very specific about the impact. So as opposed to the traditional heat diagram where we just take a look at the overall impact of that risk against the overall strategy, we can begin to drill into each objective, because obviously a high impact on a highly weighted objective is a bigger concern to us than a high impact on a less weighted objective. So this way we can begin to understand exactly what element of risk we should be paying attention to. Then what we can do is add in some leading performance indicators. Now, these indicators have to give you enough lead time to mitigate each of those risks. So, for example, it takes you 2 months to offset a risk against an objective, then you better have an indicator that gives you a 2-month lead time so that as that indicator begins to trigger yellow and red, you can take action before the risk actually impedes performance. To better visually represent what these three columns provide, we can actually multiply them together. So we multiply the weighting times the impact times the performance score to give us a visual representation of how much risk is occurring. So in this case, the length of the bar represents higher risk. The shorter the bar, the lower risk that's occurring. So you can quickly see where risk is beginning to occur related to this specific risk element. In fact, what we can then do is add up down that column to give you the overall risk score for that risk element. Of course, we can repeat this for each of the risk elements in your risk register. So now I begin to see a profile of across all risks where it is management and the board should be paying attention. Now what we can also do is add up by any one of these strategic objectives to understand where the risk is occurring, either the absolute risk or weighted by the overall importance based on the strategy. In this way, we can begin to prioritize our efforts as a leadership team to make sure that we're focusing on the things which are either as a risk most likely to be occurring or contributing to the overall strategic risk of the organization in that perfect storm scenario. So that's what's in a risk scorecard. But they're not that hard to make because most of this information is available already. Think of this. We should be able to combine the organization's knowledge about risk, which typically might look like a risk register or using a checklist like ISO 31000 or COSO. The strategy, and that's going to give us a risk analysis. And of course, this strategy might be captured by your balanced scorecard, your strategy map, or even just in your strategy documents. And the risk analysis, as we showed you, begins to take a look at how does each of those strategic objectives get impacted by each of the identified risks. In fact, if we take that and combine it with existing measures from the organization, we can build that risk scorecard. So the measures may come from existing reports, databases, your ERP systems, or maybe ad hoc information collected from existing spreadsheets and so forth. The net is those things combine to build the risk scorecard. These things generally all exist in organizations. We're just harvesting it in a slightly different way to produce that risk scorecard.